Welcome to the job site. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can join two pieces of crown molding. This technique will also work on base molding or whatever kind of molding that you're trying to join. We're actually going to be cutting this one on an angle the way we do ours. So I'll show you the wall that we got. Now this wall right here in this kitchen is right above the cabinets, and the reason we have a seam here is because this wall is longer than 16 foot. If any of our walls are ever longer than 16 foot, we have to join them with a seam. Anything 16 foot and under, we don't have to have a seam on that because the pieces we buy from the supply house come in 16 foot. So right here, we've got a wall that's beyond 16 foot. I'm gonna use this, this is a Bosch digital tape measure with the laser. This just makes it easier, that way I don't have to stretch out a tape measure. This thing is very accurate down to the 32nd. So I'm going to go ahead and get a reading on this, see what we need to make this piece, and then we'll go outside and cut that piece. And I'll show you the technique that I use to get this to look right. One other thing you want to keep in mind, you'll notice right here above the cabinets, they usually have decorations there. I'm going to put my seam over here rather than over there on that side of the wall, because you want to put your seam in the most obscure area. You don't want it to be right on a focal point when you come into a room. You want it to be out of the way in a corner if you can do that. So we always try to keep that in mind. Sometimes it's right in the middle of a wall and there's nothing you can do about that. But thankfully, the way I'm going to show you to do it today, it's going to be, you shouldn't be able to see it anyways, but just remember, put it in an obscure area. So here's the Bosch laser tape measure. Shout out to Jared Durnall for giving me this. He's a friend of mine. So let's check this out. So I'll just put it up against this wall, turn on the laser, and if you can zoom in on that laser down there, you'll see that's where it's going to read, right under that piece of crown down there. So I'll hit the reading. That's a big seam. 289 inches and 17/32. So we'll go outside and I'll show you my method to get this seam looking good. So before I show you how I'm going to actually do it on the wall here, I'm going to show you three options that you can use for a seam, and I'm going to show you my favorite one. I'll tell you what I like about mine and what I don't like about the other ones that some other people use. But whatever works for you is the way you need to go. But the first one is going to be a 45. This is a 45-degree cut. And this one has the same idea as the one we use, where you don't want it to be just straight flush, like a butt joint. This is a scarf joint, and it's a better glue surface where I can put glue on here on both sides. It's just better for that. But I don't like it because it's such a long piece right here where the angle is, that 45, that it's just a lot more to work on. So the next one I'll show you is the butt joint. This is where it's just two pieces of molding joined together. I think I cut them like this, straight to straight. That one's okay. I like this one more than that one because that one takes a lot more work as far as sanding if you're off a little bit. But this one, less glue surface because it's at an angle, and I feel like it doesn't grab as good with the glue. And the one that we use, and my favorite one, is the 22.5-degree seam. This one is less obscure. It's not just a straight line like this one. It has a glue surface like the 45, but it doesn't drag all the way across the crown like the 45. With all that, you're gonna have to sand. So the one that I do is a 22.5-degree scarf joint. These are fine if that's what you want to do, but from my experience and what I like to do, 22.5-degree scarf joint for all the seams that we do. So with that, we've got our measurement. We'll go ahead and head outside and we can get this piece cut. I'll show you how I measure it and how I cut it. There's a certain way that I like to do it, and I'll show you that right now. Okay. So here we are outside at the miter saw, and I'm going to be using DeWalt miter saw crown stops. If you want to learn more about these, I have a video called the right way to cut crown molding, or the easiest way to cut crown molding. So this is definitely something that you're going to want to use to have good seams, so you can throw your crown in there, it can lock in there, and all your cuts are exactly the same. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that 45-degree angle on that far side of the kitchen, the side opposite of the cabinets. So I'll go ahead and do that now. So I got that. That's that far side opposite the cabinets. Now I'll take this piece without any measurement. I'm not going to measure anything. And I'm going to go all the way as far as I can to the end. And I'm just going to chop off the end at 22.5 degrees. So now I've got my 45 on that end. I got a 22.5 degree over here. And then I'll go ahead and set this down. Now what I'm going to do is take this next full piece and just cut a 22.5 degree on that end so I can match these two up right here. Makes it a lot easier for measuring this. Now I can take that and just make sure it looks good right there and take my measurement. So as long as I look good here, which it does, I can take my measurement from this far end over here, and then I'll be good to go. I'll just hook that tape measure on there. And this makes it a lot easier where we cut this piece before we even glue it. So I can cut this on the miter saw, bring it back down here, get it all ready for the seam, glue it up, put the backer piece on that I'll show you here in a minute, and we don't have to worry about the seam snapping on us. So I've got that marked off. Now from here it's just another 45. So we're good to go on our length. All we've got to do now is glue this together. I'm going to put a backer piece on here, which I'll show you that, and we'll do that right now. So I've got everything I need right here for the seam. What you want to do is kind of just grab it. We do ours outside on the sidewalk, so if there's any glue, we're not inside on the floor. But just make sure you're kind of on a level spot on the sidewalk or wherever you're at. That way before you glue it, you know, if you're on some uneven surface, you're not going to be able to get that to match up good. So just make sure you're good there. And then I'll take the glue and I'll put the glue actually on the smaller piece. Even though this is the smaller piece, this is still a good 7-8 foot piece. So I'll kind of run it down like this. This is that CA glue that we always use on just about everything. If you've been watching, if this ain't your first rodeo, you already know how I feel about this. And some of it's dripping over, that's okay. I want more, way more than less. Then I'll activate it and then quickly bring it into position. And you've still got a little bit of time. So that's pretty good right there. So now that that glue is set, what you want to keep in mind when you're picking these seams up is you want to make sure that you lift them like this. So that way, and you see how strong that glue is, it actually ripped off a little bit of the concrete. So you don't want to lift up the seam where it could put stress on it. You want to lift it up vertically like this. So with that, I'll flip this on its face, and there's a little bit of concrete there, but that's okay. What I'm gonna do here, this is a piece of crown, And I'm gonna put this right here. This is a piece of this crown that I cut off. You can use anything, a scrap piece of wood, whatever you got. And I'm gonna glue this right here. So what I'll do is I'll center it like that. I'll trace it out just roughly. This doesn't have to be exact. Obviously nobody's gonna see this. And with that, I'll fill in that box that I traced with glue, a lot of glue. This is gonna be a safety seal. This will give you some peace of mind down the road too, that it's not gonna split on the customer. And then with that, what I'll do is I'll activate the other side. Heavily activate it because there's a lot of glue there. And maybe even activate that a little bit. And then quickly push on it. Try to keep it in your square. It's all gonna squeeze out, but that's okay. This is like welding wood. Just keep your hands away from it. So put a lot of pressure on it and then just weld it on there with the activator. And it'll set up good. And keep in mind make sure this piece is small enough that it doesn't mess with your flat side of your crown. See how my pencil's flat right there? That right there represents the wall right there. And then this side represents the ceiling. This method does not work on vaults. You can't use a back piece like this on vaults. You just gotta glue your seam and make sure it's good to go. So now that that's all dry, I'll flip it back over on its face, or I mean on its back, excuse me, and then I can really get a feel for what I need to sand. And there's a little bit right here that I'll sand, right there, down here is pretty good, and I'll take care of that right now. So now that I'm to this point, what I'm going to do is start with an 80 grit. If it's not that bad, you could probably start with like 120 or something, but I'm just going to start with 80. I just like to knock it down pretty good. And you'll get to see, I'm going to make this all pretty much come back to the MDF, that MDF color. And you want to keep it uniform. You don't want to put like a lot of pressure just right here where it's, you know, you want to kind of keep it pretty good, about 6 inches on each side of the seam. And you can actually see how that primer is still there. That means there's a heavy lip right there. So I want that to all look like that MDF color. You can see they're kind of starting to become one right here. That color of primer is disappearing. One thing you want to keep in mind, especially when you're coming around like these coves and this detail, is you don't want to knock that edge down. You want to go with it. Make sure that you're not going to take away the detail, because what you'll end up doing is making it actually look worse than just if it was a seam. So now that I'm all pretty much to that color, I've got all the primer off. It's smooth to my hand. You can see how it looks like one piece now. What I'll do is I'll switch from a 80 to a 220, and this just makes it where it's not as coarse as the 80, because the 80 leaves it really, really rough. So I'm just gonna go over it lightly with the 220. And this is just to make it more of a fine finish than that 80. And you'll see, even though my seam is right here, I don't know if you can really pick that up with the camera, but even though the seam's right there, I didn't just sand right there. I sanded about 4 inches on each side, 4 to 6 inches. That way it's not just a dent, it kind of flows evenly. And I like that right there, that's pretty smooth. Maybe just a little more right here. And that should do it. So I've got all this dust. I'm just gonna take this, tap it a few times, and get rid of all that. So what you're gonna need for the final step is we use this DAP Drydex spackling. This is for like holes in your wall. We use this actually for filling nail holes too. And this is a great nail hole filler as opposed to caulking, whereas caulking will just shrink and it'll show all the holes and gaps. This actually is the best thing. It doesn't shrink as it dries. So I'm going to use this to kind of float this out. You're going to need something like this, like a spackle and a wet rag. And the best way to think about this would be if you've ever done any joint compound on drywall, this would be very similar to what you're trying to do. You're trying to hide that and kind of fill in what you sanded off. And it's very light. It doesn't have to be, you know, a lot of spackle on here, because again, you'll just make the seam look worse than what it would have originally looked. So I just take some like this, 2 fingers, and kind of just spread it across evenly. Just like that. It doesn't have to look pretty. That's why we have the wet rag. We'll use that here in a minute. Just kind of fill in everywhere you sand it off. Just lightly. It doesn't have to be just globbed on there. But just make sure you got even coverage all the way across. And again, when you get into these grooves, you don't want to just glob it in there, because your goal is to make this look as seamless as possible, obviously. So I'm going to put some in there and I'll take it out with my fingernail. So that's a good amount right there. Most of this is going to come off. This is just kind of floating it out. Just make sure you're evenly everywhere. About like that. That's good. Now I've got a wet rag here, and I'll kind of just lightly glaze this over like this. Make it even. I'm just kind of filling it back in. And you'll notice how when I wipe that rag across, it leaves a kind of a grooved surface. That's okay. We're going to let that dry like that. We've got some good sunlight out here today. We'll let that dry, and that'll all get sanded flush. Now what I'm going to do, there's a groove right here in the crown. I'm just going to take my fingernail, force it in there, get all that out of there with my fingernail. And that right there is good to go for the seam. That seam will not be visible to somebody. I've even had challenges where we've challenged people to try to find our seams and they couldn't find them. So this technique works, and once this is dry, I'll lightly sand it again and we'll put this piece in. So I'll show you how I sand it once this is dry here in a second. So you'll notice now that the pink spackle that I put on here is white, so that means that it's ready to sand. It's already dry. And I'm going to take some 220 regular sandpaper. You could also use a sanding sponge if you want to. I'm just going to take this and just lightly knock down those grooves. There's some grooves here that were left behind from the wet rag, and I'm just going to knock those down. Once all those are smooth, we'll go ahead and be ready to put this in. Very lightly though. I'm kind of not even really applying pressure. I'm just letting my hand glaze over the top of it so I can knock down those grooves. And I will knock that dust off. And that seam right there, I know where it is, but I really can't even find it just looking at it right here. And then you can just imagine whenever it's painted, nobody's going to be able to find this. So that's pretty much how you do a seam. That's how we do it, and we've never had any issues. So all that we got to do now is install this piece. Just keep in mind whenever you're installing it, you want to lift it like this. Do not, especially a seam, this is like an 8-foot seam over here. You know, this is a 24-foot piece now. You know, you want to lift it up. You want to lift it up like this and then carry it in the house. You don't want to lift it up like this because it's just gonna snap. So we'll go ahead and do that now.
Is there a little dial right there?
We might have to go out that door. Out that door would probably be better. Okay, that's good. This is our snap-in technique. So as you can see, the seam is right here above this cabinet space. Very obscure area. All that I got to do now is maybe a little bit more light sanding, fill in these nail holes with spackle, and then just sand it. Or excuse me, just paint it. Once we paint this, no one will ever even know. They'll wonder how we got this big 24-foot piece in here. So anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something about how to make a seam with crown molding and trim, and I'll catch y'all next time.